day my father-in-law handed me a cashier's check for $300,000 was the same day I buried my mother. I still had dirt on my shoes from the cemetery. He was waiting in my living room when I got back, sitting in the armchair my mother used to read in, the one with the worn-out armrest she always meant to reupholster but never got around to. He had a manila envelope on his knee, and a look on his face like he was doing me a favor. My husband, his son, wasn't there. He'd said he needed to handle some logistics after the service. I didn't push it. I was running on 3 hours of sleep and whatever autopilot grief gives you when you have no choice but to keep moving. Sit down, Nora. My father-in-law. I'll call him what I always called him, which was nothing. Because I could never bring myself to call him Dad. And he never asked me to. Gestured toward my own couch like he owned it. I sat. He slid the envelope across the coffee table. There's a check inside, he said. $300,000. I want you to take it, pack what you need, and be out of this house by the end of the month. I looked at the envelope, then at him. I thought I'd misheard. The house is in my son's name, he continued. Has been from the beginning, as you know. The marriage isn't working. You know that too. This is a clean solution for everyone. My mother had been in the ground for 4 hours. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't what you'd expect. It wasn't rage. It wasn't tears. It was something quieter and colder than either of those things. A kind of clarity, actually. Like when your eyes finally adjust in a dark room and you can see exactly where every piece of furniture is. I had been bumping into things in that house for 3 years, and suddenly I could see all of it. I picked up the envelope. I said, I need some time to think. He nodded like he'd already won. Let me back up, because there are things you need to understand about how I got there. I met my husband at 26. I was finishing my 2nd year as a junior associate at an estate planning firm. Not glamorous, but solid work, and I was good at it. I understood trusts, wills, asset protection, the architecture of how wealthy families move money across generations. It was detail work, patient work. I liked it. He was charming. He was funny in that specific way where he made you feel like the joke was always between the two of you, and no one else was in on it. He came from money, old money, the kind that doesn't talk about itself. And he wore it so lightly that for a long time I didn't understand how heavy it actually was. His father ran the family's commercial real estate holdings. His mother had died when he was in college. There was a younger sister, Reese, who lived in Portland and mostly kept her distance from the family. I liked Reese immediately. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, but she'd pointed hers in a different direction, toward her own life, her own choices, far away from the family business and everything that came with it. My dad doesn't let go of things, she told me once about 8 months into my marriage, over the phone. He views everything as an asset, people included, just know that. I thought I did. I didn't. My husband and I had been married a little over 2 years when things started to unravel. It happened slowly at first, the way those things do. Longer hours at the office. Dinner at home becoming dinner without him. Small lies that didn't quite add up. A meeting that ran late on a Saturday. A conference in Denver that I later found out was actually in the city. 30 minutes from our house. I didn't confront it directly. That's on me. I grew up in a family where you worked around the hard thing, where you said, I'm fine, until you actually were, and my mother's illness the previous year had taken everything I had. She'd been sick for 18 months. I was driving to her apartment twice a week, managing her medications, coordinating with her doctors, handling the paperwork that comes with serious illness, because she had no one else. My 2 brothers lived out of state. It fell to me. My husband helped. He was good about it, for a while. Sympathetic. Present. And then he wasn't, and I told myself he was tired, and I told myself I was tired, and we just kept going. My mother died on a Thursday in March. It was peaceful, the hospice nurse told me. I held her hand. My husband showed up late to the funeral. He stood in the back. He didn't hold my hand. And 4 hours later, his father was sitting in my living room with a check. I didn't cash it. I also didn't leave. What I did do was go back to work the following Monday and ask my supervising partner if I could take on a few additional trust and estate cases. She said yes, which I expected. I was reliable, I was thorough, and I had been quietly building a reputation as someone you wanted reviewing documents before they were finalized. Then I called Reese. He did what, she said. I told her again. She was quiet for a long moment. Nora, I need to tell you something. And I need you to not panic. I said okay. Dad restructured the family trust about 4 years ago. After Mom died, when my brother was still. Before you two were serious. He put conditions on my brother's inheritance. Asset protection stuff, he called it, but there's a clause in there that I've always thought was strange. She paused. I've never seen the full document. Dad keeps it locked down, but my brother mentioned once that it had something to do with the business interests being protected in the event of a divorce. I am an estate planning attorney. Or I was, functionally, even though I didn't yet have the seniority the title implies, and what Reese had just described to me was not unusual. Wealthy families put those clauses in trusts all the time. Protect the assets, protect the bloodline, keep the money in the family. It's standard. What was not standard was a father-in-law showing up 4 hours after your mother's funeral to hand you a check and tell you to leave. That kind of urgency means something. In my work, when someone wants a transaction done fast, it's usually because they don't want you to have time to look at it carefully. I thanked Reese. I told her I'd be in touch. Then I went home, made a cup of tea I didn't drink, and sat at the kitchen table for a long time thinking about the fact that my husband and I had bought this house together, or I had thought we bought it together, and I had put $40,000 of my own savings into the down payment. The house was in his name. He had suggested it early on, for tax purposes. I was 27 and in love, and I didn't ask enough questions. I know. But here's what his father didn't know about me. I spend all day looking at documents that other people thought were airtight, and I know exactly what questions to ask. I hired a real estate attorney. A friend from law school, someone I trusted, someone completely outside my firm, so there was no conflict. I told her everything. She pulled the property records. I gave her the bank statements I'd kept. I'm meticulous about financial records, occupational habit, and she started building a picture. Then I called in a favor with a colleague who specialized in trust litigation. I didn't tell her exactly what was happening, just that I had a hypothetical about a family trust with a divorce protection clause, and I wanted to understand the mechanics. She walked me through it for 45 minutes on a Tuesday evening. I took notes. Meanwhile, at home, nothing had changed visibly. My husband came and went. We spoke. We were polite. I did not tell him what I was doing. I did not tell him that I had not deposited the check. I did not tell him that I was slowly and methodically documenting everything. The household expenses I had paid from my own accounts, the receipts, the records, 3 years of financial contributions to a life that was legally only his. 6 weeks after my mother's funeral, my friend called me with what she'd found. The down payment. My $40,000 was traceable. Wire transfer, clear documentation from my personal savings account to the escrow account. That was one thing. The other thing was bigger. There was a lien on the house, a recent one, filed 8 weeks before my mother's funeral, which meant it had been filed while she was still in hospice, while I was at her bedside, while I was not paying attention to anything except keeping her comfortable. The lien was connected to a company my father-in-law controlled. What that meant, practically, was that he had been positioning himself to absorb the property value before any divorce settlement could be calculated. The check he'd offered me was designed to be my agreement to walk away, sign, take the money, leave, and by doing so I would have legally relinquished any claim to challenge that lien. $300,000 sounds like a lot until you understand what it was buying. I sat with that for a day. I let myself be angry. Really properly angry, not the managed kind. And then I set it aside and made a list. I filed first. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it factually. The way I'd describe any strategic decision. In my work, the party who acts first in a contested estate often controls the framing. The same is true in divorce. I had my documentation in order. I had my attorney. I had a very clear picture of the financial picture they'd been hoping I wouldn't look at closely. I filed on a Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, my husband had been served. By Thursday, his father was calling my cell phone. I didn't pick up. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was very calm on the surface and shaking underneath it. The way expensive things sound when they're starting to crack. He said there must be a misunderstanding. He said he hoped we could handle this like adults. He said the check was still available if I wanted to reconsider. I didn't call back. What I did instead was send my attorney the voicemail, because an offer of payment after legal proceedings have begun has a name, and it is not a name anyone wants associated with them in a court filing. Reese called me that night. She'd heard from her brother. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I think so," I said. "I'm sorry. I know this is your family." "Nora." Her voice was very steady. "My mother left me a letter when she died. I've been holding on to it for 4 years because I didn't know what to do with it. She wrote." She stopped, and I heard her exhale. She wrote that she worried about what my dad would do with people he thought were obstacles. She'd seen him do it before. She said if any of us ever needed the letter we should use it. What's in it? Her own account of watching him restructure the trust. Her concerns about his intentions. In her own words, in her own handwriting, dated and witnessed by her pastor. A pause. "I think you should have a copy." I closed my eyes. Her mother, who had been dead for 4 years, who I had never met, had left behind something that read like she'd been watching out for exactly this. I asked Reese if she was sure. She said she'd been sure for 4 years and had just been waiting for the right moment. The discovery process took 5 months. I won't walk through all of it because some of it is technical and some of it is personal in ways I'm still processing. But here are the facts. The lien was challenged. My attorney argued, successfully, that it had been filed in bad faith as a preemptive move to diminish marital asset value, and the timing was difficult for anyone to explain away. 8 weeks before a divorce that the family had clearly been planning. While I was sitting in a hospice room, the down payment, my $40,000, was recognized as a direct financial contribution to the property, despite the title being in my husband's name. That, combined with 3 years of documented household contributions, changed the calculus significantly. The family trust divorce protection clause held, as those clauses generally do. My husband's share of the family business was shielded, but that was fine. I had never wanted his father's business. I wanted what was mine. The settlement we reached, and yes, it was a settlement my attorney recommended against a full trial and I agreed, gave me enough to start over. Not quit your job and move to Tuscany money, real money. Enough to put a down payment on a place that would be in my name. Enough to take a breath. My father-in-law did not speak in the settlement negotiations. He sat at the other end of the table with his attorneys and looked at me the way he'd looked at me in my living room that first day. Like I was an inconvenience. Like I was something that needed to be processed and moved along. I looked back. I didn't look away. At one point there was a recess and I went to the bathroom and stood at the sink and looked at myself in the mirror for a minute. I looked tired. I looked 31 years old and tired and still somehow more like myself than I had in 3 years. That was something. Reese and I still talk. She came to visit me in the new apartment last fall. She brought wine and a plant she said was impossible to kill. It is, she was right. It's thriving. And we sat on the floor because I still didn't have enough furniture, and she told me about her life in Portland, and I told her about the new cases I was working on. "You know what gets me," she said at one point. "He really thought you'd just take the check." "He thought I was overwhelmed," I said. "He picked the right moment. He was strategic about it. He didn't know what you did for a living. He knew. He just didn't think it applied to him." She shook her head. "There's something I've thought about a lot since then. The check was $300,000. The lien he'd filed on the property, the amount he was positioning to absorb, was significantly more than that. He'd offered me enough to feel substantial while he quietly took multiples of it behind me. He'd done the math. He just didn't know I could do it too. My mother always said I was too careful, too slow to trust my first instinct. She said it the way she said most things. Not as a criticism, more like a gentle observation she was handing me in case I needed it later. I think about her a lot, more than I probably let on. I think about the fact that she never got to see the apartment, never got to tell me what she thought of the kitchen or the paint color I agonized over for 3 weeks. She never got to see me get this part right. But I also think about the hospice nurse and the 4 hours that passed, and a man sitting in my mother's chair with a check on his knee, thinking the worst day of my life was the right moment to move on me. It almost was. I was devastated. I was exhausted. I was 29 days past the last conversation I would ever have with my mother. I almost said yes, I want to be honest about that. I held that envelope and I thought, what if I just let this be done? What if I just let this be done? What if I just take the money and leave and find somewhere quiet and grieve? But there was something about the way he sat in that chair, her chair. Something about the confidence of it, the assumption that I was simply going to cooperate, that I was a variable he'd already accounted for. I put the envelope down. I asked for time to think. And then I went to work. A few months ago, someone asked me if I regretted how the divorce went, if I wished I'd handled it differently. I think they expected me to say I wished I'd been less aggressive, or that I wished we'd been able to work things out, or something generous like that. Honestly, I wish I'd asked more questions earlier. I wish I'd looked at the property title the day it was filed. I wish I'd understood sooner that love and legal exposure are two different things and you have to pay attention to both. But I don't regret the filing. I don't regret the discovery process. I don't regret sitting across that table and not looking away. What they banked on was that grief makes people easy, that when you're broken open, you'll accept terms you'd never accept otherwise. That the worse the timing, the better their odds. They were almost right. Almost. I have a coffee mug on my desk now. It was a gift from Reese. She has terrible taste in gifts, and she knows it and thinks it's funny. That says something I found unexpectedly useful to look at in the morning. The document doesn't lie. Read it again. It's an estate planning joke. Not everyone gets it. I get it. People ask me sometimes what the turning point was. They expect me to say it was the filing, or the settlement, or the moment I sat across the table from my father-in-law and didn't blink. But it wasn't any of those things. It was the chair. He was sitting in my mother's chair, the one with the worn armrests she never got around to fixing, and he looked completely at home in it. That's what I keep coming back to. The comfort of it. The assumption that the space was already his, that I was already gone, that the only remaining task was the paperwork. That's what tells you everything you need to know about how certain people move through the world. They don't consider that you might push back. They've done the math and decided you won't. And if they've gotten that far without anyone stopping them, it's usually because they've been right before. What I've learned, not from this situation alone, but from years of sitting with other people's most complicated documents, their trusts and their wills and the financial architecture of their families, is that the people who take advantage of grief are counting on something very specific. They're counting on the fact that pain makes you want the hard thing to be over, that when you're already exhausted, the path of least resistance feels like mercy. $300,000 felt like mercy that day. I want to be honest about that. Part of me wanted to take it and disappear and find somewhere quiet to fall apart. But there's something that happens when you've spent years reading the fine print on other people's most important decisions. You start to hear what's underneath an offer, and what I heard underneath that check was not generosity. It was urgency. And urgency, in my experience, almost always means someone needs you to stop looking. So I looked. I don't think what happened to my father-in-law was punishment in any dramatic sense. I don't think the universe arranged itself to settle a score. What happened was simpler and more mechanical than that. He built something on the assumption that I wouldn't examine it. I examined it. The structure didn't hold. That's how most of these things actually work. The scheme doesn't fail because justice intervenes. It fails because the person it was designed to work on turns out to be paying attention. Reese's mother understood something that her husband never did. That the people you underestimate are the ones who will eventually have the clearest view of you. She left that letter because she knew, someday, someone would need it. That's not luck. That's a woman who understood cause and effect, and planned accordingly. I think about my own mother in the same way. She raised me to be careful. To read things twice. To not sign what I hadn't read. I was impatient with that when I was younger. I thought it was anxiety dressed up as wisdom. It wasn't. It was just wisdom. The apartment I live in now has my name on the lease, my name on the utilities, my name on the wall when you buzz to get in. That sounds small. It isn't. It is, in fact, the whole thing. If there's anything I'd want someone to take from this, it's not fight back. That's too simple. It's closer to, don't let the worst moment of your life be the moment you make your most permanent decisions. The people who timed that offer knew exactly what they were doing. The only move I had was to slow down when everything in me wanted it to be over. Slow down, read it again. The document doesn't lie.